Welcome to those of you who will be joining us later on the recording. Our internet stream this week, and so Facebook Live is not possible. But for those who are joining us on YouTube and on the church Facebook page, we welcome you. Today's reflection will come from the Gospel of Matthew, the 17th chapter, and we'll be looking at the first 11 verses, thereabouts. This passage has been called the Transfiguration. It's a passage where Jesus, along with James and John and Peter, had an extremely profound spiritual experience on a mountaintop, and we'll be reflecting on what that means for us, and how do we process such experiences, and what do those experiences mean to us. So, beginning at the first verse, these words can be found. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Do not tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And we'll stop there. The testimony of the saints.
Thanks be to God.
So there were a number of things that happened. Jesus and Peter, James, and John accompanying Jesus had an amazing experience, a profound spiritual experience. One of the questions that came to mind is, what about the other 9 of the disciples that were close? The other 9 disciples didn't experience this. Why was it that Jesus chose these 3 disciples to go with him? And why were the other 9 disciples left behind? You know, the text doesn't speak to that. In some ways, our first temptation, particularly in our society where we think of ourselves as a meritocracy, where people get kind of what they deserve. At least that's the way we like to think of it. Perhaps it was that Jesus selected James and John and Peter because they were more spiritually advanced and they were ready to go to this next level. And the other 9 disciples were kind of muddling along where they were, and they just weren't quite ready to go to this level. Perhaps, and for sometimes those of us who've had spiritual encounters or experiences of our own, I think there is a temptation for us to perhaps become very prideful because of our experiences. Prideful at the way that the Spirit has moved in us, and moved in us perhaps in ways that the Spirit has not moved in others. And I'm pretty sure that that's not the way we're supposed to be with that.
Pretty sure.
As I reflected on this passage, one of the things that occurred to me is that, you know, maybe some of these spiritual experiences happen to some folks and not to others, because those are the ones who needed it. Perhaps Peter, James, and John needed something extra special in order to really get what following Jesus was all about. That Jesus took them in some ways as an act of grace and an act of mercy with them to this mountain, so that they could experience something that would finally help them move past the obstacles that they had, perhaps obstacles that the other disciples themselves didn't have. The text really doesn't say, but that's the way that I think about it. Why do some people have profound spiritual encounters and other people don't? Well, the truth is we don't know, but I like to think.
Amen.
But I like to think that it's because that the Spirit supplies us with what we need.
Amen.
And if we've had those experiences, those are experiences that we needed to have to help equip us and prepare us for our journey. It's interesting now that there's a great revival going on. I think it's somewhere, is it Kentucky or Asbury, where people are having this profound experience and spiritual experience. And again, even in that same city, there's a lot of churches that are going on as normal. Most folks are going on with their regular life, and other folks are having this profound experience. And just thinking about that, there's a temptation for those who aren't experiencing that to dismiss the experiences that other people have, to sort of deny, well, they're not really going through that, they're not really experiencing that, they're just making a whole big deal out of it. In fact, they might even be making it up because they want the attention and the notoriety. They've talked themselves into believing. They want it to happen so much that they've talked themselves into believing that. And perhaps some of the other disciples might have been that way. I think about one of my favorite disciples in the Gospel of John is Thomas. Thomas is my disciple. Everyone has their disciple, but Thomas is more my kind of disciple. He's much more of a pragmatist than some of the other disciples. He was a committed follower of Jesus, but the other disciples were sitting around and they encountered Jesus, and Thomas was probably out taking care of stuff and he wasn't there. And when he came back, they share it with Thomas, this experience about Jesus appearing to them, and it's like,
right.
Jesus appeared to y'all? All right, well, whatever. When I see Jesus and I touch him, then I'll believe you. But whatever. I think there's a lot of us that can identify with that, and people have these testimonies. And one of the things that Thomas discovered is that he probably should have taken the testimony seriously. And I try and put myself in that posture when people have experiences that go beyond my experience, when people have experiences that go beyond my capacity to process and to fully understand. I try and take the stance that the Gospel of Luke says that Mary said, that she encountered these things and she just continued to ponder them in her heart. I think sometimes we just need to be willing to ponder some things in our heart, to be okay and to be accept the fact that there's a lot of things in life that we don't understand and that we don't know. But to take the testimony of the experiences that other people have had seriously. There's another thing that happens, it seems to me, a part of the dynamic when people are dealing with these spiritual encounters and spiritual experiences, is that they don't last forever. It's something that happens. And sometimes people are tempted to think that there's a problem with their spiritual walk because there was one time that they felt the passion, that they felt the Lord burning within them, wholly heavy upon them. And they don't necessarily feel that now. Well, Peter, James, and John could have had that. There was one moment with Jesus that was so super special. It was beyond all the other moments that they had had. And now, they're back to sometimes, catching fish and doing some other things and walking around with the multitudes, and it just wasn't quite the same. One thing that I believe that we have to remember is that these elevated spiritual moments are not the place that we're supposed to live. We, like Peter, would love to kind of set up a tent, set up a shelter, and just stay with that mountaintop experience. But that's not the way it works. I believe what happens when we've been gifted some sort of spiritual experience, some sort of spiritual encounter, whatever it looked like, what we have to remember is that was an experience that I believe was meant to inform us. It was meant to inspire us. It was meant to help us be our guide for the rest of our lives. That the fact that we may not be feeling quite as intense as we were maybe feeling at one point in our journey doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. It doesn't mean that we've fallen away. It doesn't mean that God is withdrawing God's self from us, or that in some way we're backslid, or that we're lesser. It just meant that was an experience that we were supposed to have, that we needed at that moment. Perhaps we were ready for it at that moment even. But it was an experience that we had, and it's an experience that we hold on to. It's an experience that we honor and that we treasure, but we still have to go back to the day-to-day life.
Amen.
The laundry has to be folded and washed. Well, maybe not. It can stay in the basket, but it does have to be washed. It certainly has to be washed, but that sort of thing. And wherever we are in life, when the kids were young, we still had carpool line. The kids had to go, and we had all these different things. The light bill has to be paid, and life continues to go on. So we're grateful for those who are experiencing revival. We're grateful for those who aren't experiencing revival. We take very seriously their testimony, even those a part of us that would say, "No, come on now." At least me. But we take seriously their and honor their experience. But remember, at some point, this revival, like all revivals, will come to an end. Whether it's a year from now or a month from now, it will come to an end. But what we do is we try to take very seriously the testimony of the experience of the people who've gone through it. And we use that experience and that testimony to be a little bit of a light to help guide our way and to guide our path. Again, if we have the experience, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are more special. If we don't have the experience, it doesn't mean that we are less special. Again, I think about the words that Jesus spoke to Thomas, where Thomas, once Jesus appeared to him, got pretty excited like the other disciples, "My Lord, my God." And Jesus said, "Well, because you've seen, you believe." But Jesus said, "Blessed are those who haven't seen and believe anyway." I believe that that's part of what Jesus is saying. Jesus is actually welcoming all of us, all who may be out there and see this at a later time, all of those who maybe haven't had these sort of profound experiences that we can't even give word to or description to or adequately explain, but we know in the deepest aspects of our being that is true, that there's no questioning, that there's no doubt. Jesus said that in many ways the person who hasn't had that experience but still decides to place their trust in him, that still decides to commit their life to the way of Jesus and the way that Jesus modeled, in many ways that person is even more blessed. So wherever we are, whatever we've experienced or not experienced, remember, it's not something that we're going to be certainly prideful of if we've had it. It's not something that we need to be ashamed of if we haven't. If we haven't had it, we don't need to beg it. It's okay. But we just kind of accept what other people have had. We take this testimony that other folks had very seriously. And we realize that all of these experiences are just for a season. And they are meant to help equip us to walk the path that Jesus has given us, to walk after his example, the way of love, where we care for each other, everyone, even our enemies that we talked about in our adult education time earlier this morning. Peace be with you.